You're listening to Pointing Pointers, the Point to Point podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Pointing Pointers. I'm Ben Atkins, and if you're watching on YouTube again this week, which it will be available on, you will see that I am joined by Darren Edwards, who inexplicably we've not yet had on. Darren, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks, Ben. Pleased to be here.
And for the keen-eyed amongst you, you realise that is in fact the real life Caroline Bailey. It's no good getting your name wrong for a start, is it, Caroline? How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Ben. We've had a good season to get started with, so all good so far.
Yes, fantastic. So what we thought we'd do is have a little look through the final meet of the season with the man who himself rode a double, and have a little look through what happened down at Umberley at the weekend, and then we'll move on to some broader topics before as we round out the season. So Darren, you rode a double, and I have to say the first horse, whose name I will find any second now when I find my notes, was quite impressive. Did you enjoy?
Well, I thought they were both quite impressive, Ben. So yeah, better get your notes out. But yeah, no, Lakota Warrior was the first. Yeah, was the first horse. Won a conditions race. In truth, it wasn't a particularly strong race. Only the four runners, and 3-1 on about says it all. But I think, yeah, a 3-1 on shot. You know, the best result is obviously to pass the post first, and it's more of a relief than anything else, and particularly as it was my last day. So yeah, but he was impressive, nice horse.
And now I found my notes, I realised it was actually the second horse that you went on that I thought was the most impressive of Dorrell's Piergi. I just thought that you got in a bit tight to the last, and it's probably value for the winning margin, as they say in the trade.
Yeah, no, definitely he won pretty easy. I just thought, well, as it was my last ride, I better make a bit of an effort on the run-in, because the last four times he's a remarkable horse, really. He actually ran in and out, but Bartlett back along. He was a Sullivan Bloodstock horse, and was at Willie Mullins's when he was younger, and then he's also been at Skelton's, and they won a couple of races with him. He was only beaten about 5 lengths in a 100 grand hurdle race around Punchestown or somewhere. So to be running around at Umberley,
that explains it.
That explains it, and it's taken us a while to find the right set of keys for the ignition for him. Really, we ran him a couple of times early on in the season on sort of softish ground. He didn't perform particularly well. He's got plenty of physical problems. So Dean's done remarkably well, really, to turn him around. And there's really three factors that are behind that. He started training him from the field. We've put a hood on him, and we've put him on better ground, and those three things combined have really turned him around, and he's won, I think, 5 races in about 7 weeks. So fair play to him.
Yes, remarkable. Just for anyone watching on YouTube and getting distracted there, Darren, as you're talking, Caroline, it's say if you need to mute at any point, because Gerald
was in the background on the phone. I have actually just gone in and told him to shut up.
Well, I've sent him
upstairs.
So yeah, you can always turn him off in between.
I've sent him upstairs out of the way.
Is he on the phone to Arla or something, Caroline, trying to sort of negotiate up the milk price?
I'm absolutely certain he'll be negotiating something, ice cream or milk.
Fantastic. And so well, we haven't mentioned it yet, Darren, but you are retiring, and that was your last ride. And you've pulled stumps on what's been a pretty incredible career. 308 winners, point to point, and 18 under rules.
No, I've had 330 point to point and 30 under rules, but I'm so old that I predate the website, you see. So that's that's why it is.
How can my sources be this wrong?
Well, this is
always...
it. You wanna sack Sam or something for leading you down the garden path. But yeah, no. So my first point to point season was a 2001 foot and mouth season. So I think the website only came into play in about 2005. So hence there's a few winners missed off there. But yeah, no, it was always my sort of plan, if you like. I always said, when I was riding, that I didn't want to fall into the veteran category, which at the time was over 40. So I would retire before I was 40, and it just so happens that there's a number of factors which have sort of driven me to decide to stop, and another one being that Dean is planning on taking out his license this summer. So
oh wow, okay,
there will be less pointers in his yard, and really for me having a sort of a desk job, then I need sort of 70-80 rides a season in order to maintain my fitness and keep my weight under control, and I only actually had, I think I had about 50 rides this year, and it was a real struggle between November and April, really, when it only started getting going. Then it was so stop start that you'd be riding, and then you'd expect to ride the next weekend, and then it would get cancelled, and then you'd have two weekends off or 2 weeks off, and then the weight goes up again. So it was a bit of a vicious cycle for a few months there. And yeah, so fair play to Dean and all his owners, and the owners that have supported me. They've been pretty patient with me. So
absolutely, and we'll go through your story a little bit more shortly. But just to wrap things up at Humberley, a jockey at the other end of the spectrum, just starting out, and he's had a heck of a season. Ed Vaughan won on Free Pedro for Bradley Gibbs. That horse has been a bit of a revelation since coming back from under rules, hasn't it?
Yeah, it seems to have been. I think, like some of these horses you see that come back to pointing from under rules, that have got that rules experience, they're just can be a little bit more sort of grown up in the sort of maidens and restricted, and a little bit slicker. So if you've got a horse that's rated around the 100 and it's coming back into a maiden and a restricted, you're pretty hopeful that it's gonna win. And Ed's done fantastically well this season. I actually rode against his dad, so that about says it all. Was
that the moment, Darren? Was that the moment when Ed stepped into the dressing room and you thought, "This is..."
Well, there's been plenty of moments before that, Ben. But no, I thought Ed's most impressive ride was actually on Ring St. John.
That was a walkover. Are you winding me up? Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
I nearly fell into your trap, Darren. You're going to have to get up slightly earlier, but I nearly fell into your trap. Yeah. So there are a couple more results to go through. 33-1, the Bistoury d'Honneur or similar. What can you tell us about Alice Proctor, if anything? And watching the replays, it's fair to say she pinched it from the front.
Yeah, what can I tell you about Alice Proctor? I don't really know Alice, if I'm honest, but I do know I think she is the sister of Freddie Proctor, and I think they're based down in, I want to say, Dorset somewhere. I think Freddie and Alice's father may be something to do with the Glanville stud, so sort of Dorchester,
that's right, yeah,
Dorchester direction. But yeah, by all accounts, from what I saw, she gave it a really, really good and positive ride. So well done to her.
Yeah, all power to her. And that man James King rounded off the season with a nice winner. I was surprised, having watched the replay. I was surprised to see that it went off 6-4 joint favourite, and only just beat Gallenray with Fly on board. I thought he was quite unlucky, really. Just got got it pinched away from him at the dying strides on 14-1 Gallenray. And yeah, it was a canny ride from James, as you've come to expect.
Yeah, I think, like you say, I thought the same. Really, it looked like Gallenray was going to win, coming up the hill and jumping 2 out. And I think probably the last fence at Umberley is quite quite trappy. Really, it's slightly downhill. It's on a camber. There's a sort of car crossing immediately after the fence, so it's not the easiest fence, and it just looked like it started sort of backing off a bit, going to the last, and it just gave James and his horse a chance up the inside, and yeah, so you'd be surprised if Gallenray couldn't go on and win some races off the back of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually were meant to have Martin on the show a few weeks back, and something got in the way, and we're gonna save him and Ella Herbison for an episode next year as well. So there's a lot to look forward to if you're just tuning in. We're going to have Paul Miller, as we said, in a few weeks' time. So that to look forward to. I say a few weeks, a few months. Crikey,
they might be Mr. and Mrs. McIntyre by then. You never know.
Well, yeah, that's the rumor. Or are they actually engaged?
Well, I know they went on a romantic walk into the Valley of the Rocks fairly recently, but I don't think Fly got his knee dirty at this point anyway.
Oh, an exclusive, non-news exclusive there. They are not engaged. So Darren, let's just recap your career slightly. So could you just, for those who are unfamiliar, that have spent their pointing lives with their head buried in the sand up north, just recap on some highlights for us, if you would.
Yeah, well, as I say, yeah, my pointing life started in 2001, which was a very short season due to foot and mouth. But I had my first winner at Chipley Park on a horse called Blade of Fortune, which I looked up 20-1, and I actually just beat Godfrey Maundrell. And so, yeah, so that was many moons ago, but it was quite nice because Gerald Greenway, who trained that horse, was actually at Umberley on Saturday to see my last winner as well. And actually, I had a few. I had a winner at Upcut Cross there a couple of weeks ago for a lady called Janet Ackner, who I also rode for I think I had my first winner for her in 2002. So there's not many. It's and she, Janet in particular, had had plenty of people ride for her in between times, but it's sort of gone full circle that I've just ridden for her for the last few seasons again, really. So yeah, it's nice to have retained those associations with people, because I think one of the biggest sort of changes I've seen in my time pointing is I think the sport, like a lot of things in life, has become far more fickle, and you don't tend to, or in my opinion anyway, you don't tend to see the level of the same sort of loyalty that perhaps you used to see in the past with long associations with people. So yeah, it was great to ride for people like Gerald and Janet. So yeah, that was good. What other highlights? I guess in terms of some of my best horses, horses like, so you'll no one will know anything about unless you're from probably Devon, but Lucet Annie, Coombe Hill was another one for Charlotte.
I've heard of that one.
Charlotte Tizard, yeah, I won several. I think I won the same Hunts Chase 3 years in a row on him at Wincanton, and he actually won when there was quite a Paul Nicholls had a horse in it. This was, I think, the last time he rode it, one of Andy Stewart's horses, and we were coming down to the last, and it was a fairly young lad on Nichols's horse, and it had a wobble going into the last, and he came off it, and he sort of cartwheeled over the fence, and it actually made sort of ITV 6 o'clock news, I think it was, because it was quite sort of dramatic. He sort of went up in the air, sort of cartwheeled, but I was the sort of benefactor of that, and I think I actually ended up beating Harry Cobden and was in second in that particular race. So
Amazing.
So Coombe Hill was another highlight. Plenty of winners for the Bradley Partnership, who now have horses mainly under rules. They've been very good to me. Plenty of winners for them. Nearly getting on towards 50 winners for them. 100 winners for Dean. And I've just been very lucky, really. Touchwood managed to stay fairly injury free, which always helps. So
Yeah.
I've never really missed much of a pointing season through injury. It's tended to be foot and mouth, COVID, or equine flu, or whatever, those things that have affected everyone rather than things that have just affected me.
Fantastic. And you've had that is a heck of a lot of winners by anyone's standards, even if my original stats were wrong, Darren. So 330, it's a nice round. It's got a nice round ring to it. It's a lot better than 328, isn't it?
Well, I thought so, actually. Yeah, 330, and then another 30 under rules. So it rounds up quite nicely, doesn't it?
Beautiful. Yeah, I can get behind that. Oh, well, fantastic. Well done. And what I want to know is, obviously you're a PPRA rep down there. I think you're a bit more than that, aren't you? I can't quite remember.
I used to be a PPRA rep, Ben. I'm on the PPA board now. I'm an independent member on the PPA board.
That's the one. Yes.
I used, I think for probably, I can't remember how many years, probably too many years, but I was on the PPRA committee for probably 10 years, I should think, maybe. I went to a lot of meetings anyway, ate a lot of sandwiches. I was on that as a jockey's representative.
And you plan to stay there? Well, what I'm trying to get at here, Darren, is it'd be a terrible shame for you. You're not just going to walk off into the distance, are you? I'd imagine you're going to stay well involved in the sport going forward.
Yeah, well, I've got to have that conversation with Caroline, really. But
don't give her your resignation live on air.
He's definitely stay on the board, I can assure you.
Another exclusive, but no, I'm on the my tenure on the committee is to the end of this year anyway, and then we'll sort of see beyond that, in terms of what pans out. But no, I'm keen to, I think it's important that people that have enjoyed pointing and reap the benefits of the sport put something back in, and as I say, I think I've put a good bit back in. That's probably 15 years through my roles on the PPRA committee and the PPA board, and I'm sure I'll continue to have some involvement in some capacity, but I'm not sure exactly what yet.
Oh, that's fair enough. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for. I can't believe that we wait till you've retired to have you on this podcast. It's a crying shame. I'm not sure. We're gonna have to sack the producer, who until this year was me. So there we go. There we go. So we've got you both on. Caroline, we're going to talk about your new appointment in any minute now, but just as a parting shot to get us rolling into the discussion part, Darren, what do you see as Pointing's main challenges going forward from here on in?
Yeah, main challenges, Ben, I think are obviously the politically we've got the we've got the general election on the horizon now. Labour have been fairly clear about what their intentions are around hunting. Obviously, there's a very close link between hunting and pointing. So we've got that bridge to cross in terms of what happens if hunting is outruled under Labour's time in government. So that's obviously a fairly major issue to overcome. We've got more general challenges around the economics of associated with racing in general, the cost of living, cost of having horses in training, and the challenges that brings with it, and indeed the cost of running the sport, and rules racing, as most people know, has similar challenges. So the financial side of things is going to be a key challenge going forward. So politically, financially, big challenges, and then obviously we have the spring, which is there's no beating about the bush. There is has been a declining number of horses for a long time now, and we've got to, as a sport, we've got to make decisions and put in place solutions to try and address that. So there's plenty of challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Caroline, for anyone who doesn't know, you've been recently appointed as the chair of the PPA, the Point to Point Authority, on New Year's Day. I've appointed people actually on the Nick Luck Daily to read the article that Carl Evans wrote about you on an interview you gave for the Racing Post recently. It's a really good summary of kind of where you're at with lots of things, and it's well worth a read. If you haven't read that yet, I'd encourage you to do so. It talks of lots of different things, but in particular, one thing that I've never really been able to get my head around, and I think there's probably, and I don't mind admitting that, there's probably quite a lot of other people in the sport, it's just how all these bodies work together and slot together, and how your role is different to in practice is different to Paul's, etc. Would you just be so kind as to give us a sort of a brief outline of what it is that you do?
Well, obviously, I'm very new to the becoming the chair since the 1st of January, and it's been a big learning curve to me, because I started off obviously ridden point to pointers, trained point to pointers. Then I took a license out, and Gerald, husband, took over the point to pointers. So I've been involved from the participation side, and running our own point to point. I was secretary in the days when we took them all on the phone and in writing, and so I'd had a lot of involvement, but yes. I hadn't ever been involved really from the running of the sport side. So to come in as the chair was a big eye-opener for me and a big learning curve. So I have spent the last 5 months, admittedly, learning how the sport is run, and what the involvements of all the different departments, as in the PPSA, the PPORA, the PPRC. There's all sorts of links that bring point to pointing together. And so I have, over the last 5 months, been learning how it all, with the help of obviously Peter, who's now retired, but and talking to a lot of people, either on the phone or meeting them in person, to appreciate how it's all run. We have Richard Fuller, who's chairman of the PPRC, which is the involvement with Weatherby's and their side of the sport. We then have the PPSA, which is the Secretaries Association, in which Ilona is chair and sorts out all the fixture list. There's obviously the offices where the chief exec works, and he runs the day-to-day running of the sport. We obviously then have an involvement with the levy board. We have an involvement with the BHSA, which is the hunting side of it, of which Alan Hill is our representative on the board. So there has been a lot of there are a lot of involvements from different departments.
Made me feel less stupid for not understanding it at face value now.
I've had to learn just as much as probably most people listening, that actually there is an awful lot that goes into the sport from a lot of different departments.
There's a jockey club rep as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
Caroline,
we have. We are well represented on the board with Philip Hall, who is our representative on the Jockey Club, who is extremely helpful. We have our two we have Darren from the south, and we have Fiona Needham, who obviously won the Fox Hunters this year, which we were very proud of.
Following in your footsteps.
We've got a really good board. They are independent members, and they both, Darren's finished on a wonderful total of winners and is a great representative of the southern area. Fiona obviously has had an exceptional season with her lovely horse and won the Fox Hunters, and so she contributes from the north, and with her experience as a clerk of the course and a huge knowledge of the point-to-point world in the north, she brings that to us. We've then got Alan Hill, who represents the hunting side and then we've now got Charlie Post, who's replaced Mark Buchan as the PPORA on the board. So we have a really good range of people for me to work with and discuss the future of the sport, and then obviously we now have Paul, who's replaced Peter, to take it forward.
So
that generally explains it.
So we're going to unpick this slightly more because we've got so close to the bottom of it. We may as well go. So you had to be appointed as the chair of the PPA to appoint the CEO. Is that correct?
That was my biggest job that I have done in the last 5 months. Yes, is being a new chairman, to then, within the first few months of being chairman, to appoint a new chief executive with the support of my board. Let me say.
Yes, absolutely. And so I've already got a few questions bubbling under the surface here, but one of the questions that intrigues me looking from the outside, and believe me when I say I'm not in the slightest bit interested in who holds the power in inverted commas, or all I'm interested in is the future of the sport, like all of us on the podcast. But who is responsible for what decisions, in the sense that if there's the chief executive, and does it work, in the same way that a prime minister and a president does, or like the monarchy and the prime minister? How does it work? Who really makes the decision?
I've never run the country, Ben. I don't
No. But you've run our little country. So could you just, have you got an example, perhaps, of something that you would make the final decision on, and something that Paul would, just for anyone who'd be curious?
Well, yes. I mean, most of the decisions are run through the board, but as chairman, I would sit and put out to the discussions on a board meeting, and then they are discussed, and then they go back to the chief exec. He will work out the agenda for the meeting of what needs discussing, what changes might be made, and then we discuss at board level. So I obviously sit as chair of the board, and we discuss all these issues, and then we come up with the most sensible decision to take the sport forward. So
it's Paul that then rubber stamps, we
then rubber stamp decisions. Obviously, I am relatively new, and so I have had to do a lot of learning with Peter of how the system does work, and I have had a meeting with Paul today to go again through how he wants to take it forward with us, so yes, and I have travelled the country as much as I can this season. It's been difficult with cancellations and things to get the views of all the local point to points and what they would like us to take forward any decision. So I take back to the chief exec what I've seen, what I've heard, and where I think we could make alterations. It then gets put back through the system and back to the board.
It's a more of a you're sort of in charge ultimately of more strategic level decisions, aren't you, Caroline? Whereas Peter in the past, or now Paul, will be more sort of day-to-day running, Ben.
Day-to-day running.
And then the major issues that come up will get, as Caroline said, will get passed back through Caroline to the board, and then coordinated. Caroline will sort of coordinate with the different stakeholders on the board to canvass opinions where necessary, in order to then, take a strategic decision on things.
Okay, good. Glad we've cleared that one up. So it was a huge piece of work for you, no doubt. I at one stage it sounded the untrained eye of the outsider, it looked like there was going to be no one putting their hat in the ring to replace Peter. And then I believe that in the end there was really quite a few applications, and it must have taken a bit of doing to get to Paul and make your final decision. Apparently, the final shortlist was really good quality, and it must have been quite a hard decision.
Yeah, we were actually delighted that we had so many applications. I think we probably had about 24 in the end, which we wheedled down by looking at CVs, discussing who got the most experience for the job, and we were going to interview 8, and one dropped out on the morning of, but we interviewed 7 candidates, and they all gave us a presentation that we discussed the future of the sport, and we then took 2 further forward, and we had different members of the board, and we then re-interviewed them, and they did give a thorough presentation of what they would put to the job of being chief exec. And Paul, it was a unanimous decision by all members of the board that Paul was the right man for the job.
Well, that's good to hear. I think unanimous decisions are always healthy.
Yeah, always a lot easier if we all agree.
And you can't have anyone slinging mud a few years down the line saying, "I told you so."
No, I told you he wasn't right for the job.
Yeah. So no after timing when he's
on our head be it. We have.
Yes. That's great, and we don't want to give him too easy a ride, but from what I've heard so far, Paul is. Paul, is people are really happy that he is listening to what they've got to say, and I believe this week he's going to be putting out a bit of an introduction video to himself and taking that forward. So so far so good, and I think we've given him enough praise on this podcast. But it's we're fairly everyone who's come on this podcast is fairly unanimous in the fact that Peter's done a fantastic job, and it does feel very positive that the early signs are there that Paul's going to do an equally good job in what will hopefully, for the sport's sake, be slightly different circumstances. Although I'm sure there are challenges ahead.
Oh, I think there's huge challenges ahead.
Yes. So let's move on. Let's just break the back of a nice, easy one. A few questions that I jotted down earlier. What will a Labour government mean for the sport? I'm judging at a puppy show this week, and I'm, as I'm sure it is up and down the land, it's a hot topic of debate amongst the hunting world and the racing world, as the two hold hands. But I think I think the hunting world has kind of accepted to a point that there is going to probably be a Labour government, and rather than sort of wasting efforts on trying to change that outcome, it's more about how we can impact the future, knowing that there probably is going to be a Labour government. And I imagine the same conversations happening in the corridors of power at HQ, Caroline.
It is, yes. And it has been, to be fair to Peter, he had been putting in place his thoughts and ideas for how we would take the sport forward without the hunt element. If hunting does get hunts get disbanded because of the government decisions, we've got pull pointing forward, and it's going to be a lot of decisions made. I've been to a couple of meetings, and I've been to an AGM, and from the chat, the point, the hunting people will want to have a sport to support. How we support it will be decisions we sort of are discussing at the moment. But the countryside community will still want to have countryside sports of some sort. That is the vibes we're getting. So obviously we rely on hunts to put their meetings on with the courses, all their volunteers, and they run, the majority are run to support the hunts. So obviously there's a lot of thought into financing the future of pointing, how much, how the hunts will run. Will they have hunt clubs and run all sorts of sidelines of hunt or not, they won't be hunt rides as in hunting as such, but they will. At the moment, there's a lot of those sort of things that go on. The hunting world is not just based on hunting days. It's, as you know, and a lot of the pointing people know, it's a way of life in the countryside, and I think that from all the chats I've had and the meetings I've been to, that there will be support for point to pointing. Obviously, we may lose some courses. There'll be some landowners that run their point to points because they're raising funds for their hunts. So that is something that, will affect the sport. But then we'll hopefully have courses that we'll want to continue to run on a slightly more commercial basis. There's an awful lot of things to look at, but the vibes are good for the sport. That, if the Labour gets their way and they disband hunting, then we will do our very best to keep the sport running as we know it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things. I'm aware that this can be a controversial issue and is very emotionally charged for lots of reasons, but I think I can give a balanced view on the basis that I'm an MFHA. As Alan pointed out, though, actually, I called him anyway. Got that wrong at the forum as well. But, I am an MFH, and and obviously I love racing, as you all know. So the first thing to say is, I don't necessarily think that a ban on hunting, an inverted commas proper ban from Labour, will actually be terminal to hunt, in the sense that we've adapted and overcome to this point. There's other ways to have fun on a horse, as we've shown. There's many variations of following hounds around the countryside on a weekend, and I don't necessarily think that a full ban even would be terminal to all hunts. The second thing is, in some ways, I can see, I'm trying to get the positives out of a potentially bad situation. I can see a world in which disassociating hunts with point to points could actually bring benefits in terms of attracting sponsors who may otherwise be opposed. There's another angle as well, which is, if the funds that are being made at point to point aren't being taken out of the point to point to fund a hunt, then potentially that money is just being reinvested in the point to point course, better facilities. There is a world in which actually the racing and the course and everything gets really good, and there's a new hospitality suite built because there's 15 grand in the kitty at the end of the year. I've got the rose tinted specs on here, Caroline.
No, you're right, Ben. With these all things that have been discussed, I can assure you, and getting, as you've said, renewing, tackling sponsors who are slightly wary of having a connection with hunting due to the opposition to it. So yes, it is, I would totally agree with what you've just said, and we are looking forward in that direction.
The final and perhaps most controversial aspect is, if some hunts that are heavily funded by point to points were to call it a day, a reduction, there's probably some people, me included, that think an overall reduction in the fixture list and crowding on certain weekends and things like that is probably good for the competitiveness of the sport. And if there are certain hunts that have always had Easter bank holiday, let's say, just weren't running a meeting anymore, that racing in general might be more competitive. Darren, do you think that's fair?
Been a bit controversial there, Ben. You're not going to chuck hunts off their days, are you?
2 winners at Umberley.
Oof. I do agree with you in principle. I think it's supply and demand at the end of the day, and horse numbers have fallen. The fixture list that we've had historically is going to be difficult to sustain competitively. With the reduced number of horses we now have, so naturally, therefore you reduce supply, which will improve demand, or at least keep the competitiveness of racing up. So I think that will naturally have to happen. I think the board is very aware of that. Obviously, it's very sensitive as to how you go about implementing that without being divisive and causing problems or upsetting people. And that's I think that is one of the biggest challenges of the board, for Caroline, for Paul coming in, and for Peter in the past, is how you deliver change without upsetting the traditionalists, and that's a big challenge. But from what I can say of my 2.5 years on the board now, is then any of the decisions that have been taken have always been with the best intentions and benefits of the sport in mind. And I think sometimes people haven't stepped back and perhaps really thought about why those decisions have happened, and normally there are good reasons for why decisions have been taken. And as a board member, we're tasked with thinking about the sport holistically, not just you got to think outside of the blinkers that we otherwise might wear through the sort of the roles and personal involvements that we have in the sport, be that riding, training, owning, whatever it may be. That through those roles you see a particular angle, but you've got to look at it from all the angles and from all the stakeholders' perspectives.
And this is, I was thinking about this earlier, and this is kind of a fundamental problem in, without sounding too dramatic, you understand, in the sense that, the strongest of leaders, you can't, when there's such a broad church, like a country or like a big business or whatever, the strongest leaders can't always be popular, because they have to make decisions that other people don't want to, for the health of the country, for the strength of the economy, for whatever. And they have to say, this is what we're doing. And there's winners from that decision and there's losers. And in this case, if someone came along and just carved up the fixture list, there'd be 4 or 5 hunts left without a fixture. They'd probably collapse the hunt because there's no funds to be raised or whatever. So the reason why someone can't necessarily come in and do that is because there's so many people in the sport who are just volunteering. The vast majority of roles within the sport are voluntary, and people are giving their time on the bigger committees that make decisions, right the way down to the point-to-point committees in the individual hunts. There's fence judges, there's stewards. Everyone is just doing it for free. At which point, if you fundamentally upset them and make them feel like they're disenfranchised, they just walk away, and there's no there's no notice period, there's nothing. You can just, we're dealing with a lot of volunteers, and so therefore it's very difficult to just say, no, that's a load of rubbish, this is what we're doing and here's why, bang, because of that reason. So that's one of the interesting things. When I heard initially about Paul's appointment, and I thought, oh, that's going to be interesting. We kind of got a businessman coming in from the outside, and he's going to get the axe out and start wielding it around a bit. But actually, the polar opposite is true of my experience with Paul so far, is that he is very, very diplomatic. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out. I hope I haven't waffled on there, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's impossible to make strong kind of game-changing decisions without really winding up quite a lot of people who are essentially giving their time for free, which makes it, the governance of the sport, very, very tricky.
Well said,
you don't
Ben.
need to say anything.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, there are an awful lot of people, as you've just said, that give up a lot of time, including ourselves. But we do it because we love the sport, we're passionate about the sport, and we want to take it forward. So, this is why we've taken on the positions that we have. And yes, there are difficult decisions to be made, but we do take in all the different views from as much as we can. Hence, I have visited. Well, I didn't make Wales because of the weather. They were off, the ones I'd penciled in to visit, but I have travelled around the country. I've been to courses that I've never visited before, which has been really interesting, and met a lot of the people involved. And, we are open to listen and discuss all these things, but we have to take in, as Darren said earlier, we have to take in the picture of the the whole sport, not just each individual area. We help all the individual areas to do the best for them, but equally we have to put in it in the interest of the sport, the whole country, to run it as one to go forward.
So we've kind of done our introduction and it's taken about an hour, so we're going to have to move on to. I did want to discuss a couple of other things. You said earlier, Darren, that Dean Summersby was going to take his license. John Barlow's taking his license. Max Comley is taking his license. Tom Ellis is taking his license. Should we be worried?
It's inevitably going to have an impact. How much of an impact is going to have, will be hard to tell until it's happened. I think, take Dean for example, with a yard of say 14 stables, realistically half of those might be licensed boxes next season. So you might lose 7 pointers, say. I don't know with Max or John Barlow or obviously Gina and Tom in terms of what their split is likely to be going forward. I see Tom's got a few runners in the last week or two under rules. So, it is difficult to gauge, and that's one of the big challenges we have is you don't, we can't predict how many, we just don't know how many horses there will be next year. That depends on all the factors that we've discussed, and will inevitably change between now and November when the season restarts. So yeah, it's a threat, it's a risk, but I guess is it any bigger risk now going into the next season as it was this time last year going into the season we've just had? It happens. Hopefully new blood will come in and fill those spaces.
And Caroline, all about the kind of interplay between training under rules and having a split yarders, so to speak. And we spoke recently about the opportunities for kind of more fluid approach between under rules racing and point to pointing. Do you think there's more that racing under rules could do to support British pointing? Do you think that that's something that we need to be asking for as such?
Well, yes, funnily enough, I have had some conversations in the last 2 or 3 days, just testing the water as to where we look towards going forwards, and the interlinks between the two sports. We have owners, jockeys, trainers, etc., helpers, stewards, all interacting from one sport to the other, whether it's going from point to pointing into national hunt, or national hunt coming back into point to pointing. So we need to continue working towards how we can keep our horses for point to pointing and attract horses and owners and jockeys particularly. We've been low on this season. Horses numbers did eventually sort of level up pretty well from the season before, but jockeys have come down, so we're very keen to introduce a few more novice riders and grassroots races for next season. And yes, I look back and I think, in my heyday of training point to pointers, I probably had 30, which in those days was a lot of horses. They all survived very well when I changed and took a license out. The numbers, then it will happen, and if somebody else comes in, obviously Gerald, then we split the yard, and he ran a yard, and he kept the owner riders that loved the point to pointing and kept point to point side of it running. But he would have probably only had 10 or 12 at the most, as against the larger numbers. But it's the way the world is. I felt at that time I needed to move on and try something new, and I had 1 or 2 good horses. The best one, thanks to Darren, who gave me advice to buy it, or I asked him for advice. It was second in a maiden to one he rode, and I rang him and said, "What sort of maiden race was it?" And he said, "Oh, it'll be good enough." And he ended up winning the Ida, so it was good advice from Darren. And he did come up when he was up in Leicestershire and ride out for me a bit. So, but that yes, it felt the time was right for me, but I never lost that love for pointing, and I think you'll find that with the Ellis, certainly with I don't know. Some of but with the Ellises, obviously we've still got Gina and Jack riding pointing, and from what I've heard through the grapevine, that Tom's only intending at the moment to have 12-ish horses, and the rest of the yard, 2 separate yards, will still have pointers. So it hopefully will be a gradual change, and we've then got to try and encourage more people to come back to pointing or start off in pointing before they do what what we've all done in the past was we learnt all our training skills and riding skills through the point world. So we've got to encourage that still.
Yeah, I suppose I'm trying not to give myself a compliment here. Because I'm a younger man who's come into the sport in the last 5 years. People probably listening are probably banging their head against the wall and saying, people have been leaving pointing and training under rules for forever, and it's continued to survive. And there is there's lots of instances in life where that's true. When you just look at it in the short term, you can think there's a massive problem, but actually this has probably been happening for a long time. Yeah. And as much as it does seem a bit of a shock for Dean and Max and Tom and John to be leaving at the same time, the sport will survive. It's happened before and it'll happen again, sort of thing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think that so, and I don't think they'll walk away from the sport. I think that they will continue to be. It's been where they've learnt their trade, and as Dean said, I'm sure, as Darren said, I'm sure Dean will continue to have a view because that's where he's learnt his job, and it's moving forward, and thinking back of all the people that did start pointing and then went on with a license and have still kept their links with pointing one way or another. And I think some of the National Hunt trainers realise to keep staff, it's a good move to have a few pointers that they own themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kim Bailey's had one or two. There's quite a few examples. Ollie Murphy's had one or two that they own themselves, and they keep them, so which they can do in their license yards as long as they own them. David Pipe, and they give their staff rides on them, and that's something we can encourage because if they love the pointing, these riders, it's the future jockeys we're looking for.
Yeah,
it's natural evolution, Ben, because at the end of the day, all those people you've named are sort of upwardly mobile yards that have sort of got to the top or reached the top of pointing, and therefore, well, what do you do when you're the leading trainer of large yard or a medium scale yard, as Dean was this year? It's like, well, it's a sort of natural next step, which is a new challenge, but that is. You see it with jockeys as well. The best there's a lot of young jockeys come through. They want to be professional jockeys. So it's a pointing is a stepping stone. And as you say, that it just so happens that you've got 3 or 4 larger trainers there, if you like, that are taking that decision at the same time. But again, there's lots of factors and reasons why they're doing that, and many of which we've discussed, and there's the financial side of it as well, and we've got to have our eyes open as to why those decisions are being taken, and what pointing can do to or if indeed anything can be done to address it or stem that flow, or indeed we just accept that it is a natural evolution and therefore we've got to concentrate on getting new blood in.
Yeah, makes sense to me. We are going to hear in a moment from the new CEO of the PPA. And before we do that, I suppose I better just ask you two, looking forward to next season in your new role, Darren, as I suppose out of your favourite role, should we say? And Caroline, as you continue in your new role, is there any other business? Is there anything that you wanted to discuss, or anything that we need to be having our minds as we roll into the summer, do you think?
I think, I think the Labour government issue is one of our biggest factors as to the future of the sport, which we're all aware of. Paul is obviously very aware of, and he is already talking to an awful lot of people, and he's putting himself forward to talk, to be open with what he's thinking and how we're going to work forwards. As you said, he's going to put out a video so people can see him and listen to what he's done in the first month and what he's going to do in July, and we'll then support him with it. But there won't be an immediate change for next season because most of the fixture list is already arranged. They've got a meeting, I think, next week or fortnight, but it's all pretty much established. And until the hunting issue is resolved one way or another, we won't know how many courses and how the fixtures are going to work out, as it's proven this year with we had the terrible weather which affected a lot of meetings, but because of that, we actually ended up with better racing because everybody had to take each other on because of the less fixtures factor. But equally, every hunt that wants to run a fixture, we are supporting. But things are going to change, and we can't say today what we're going to do in the next 18 months because at the moment we're very reliant on what's going to happen higher up than we are.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Okay, well, let's hear now from Paul Miller. Paul Miller, it was great to meet you the other day at Stratford, and looking forward to having you on at the start of next season to have a more in-depth chat. Paul, you are doing a video this week to introduce yourself to people, and I'm sure that you're going to keep continuing to get around and speak to people over the next few weeks. But is there any key messages that you wanted to get out there for people to mull over the summer?
Thanks, Ben, and very good to meet you at Stratford as well. I'm sure we will be catching up properly at the beginning of the new season. So my plan is, what I would like to do over the coming months, I will be sending out video updates just so people can understand what I'm doing, the sort of things we are focusing on and why we've made various decisions or whatever. The first month at the moment, I have a massive entry, as you can imagine, a big to-do list and quite a few deadlines coming up in preparation for next season. But once I have June out of the way, my plan is, so I'm already speaking to people around the sport, speak to more of them, but start to set up a number of user groups. And that's people with skills and experience and knowledge across the wider sport, talking about things that they want to focus on. So it could be issues, it could be solutions to things, it could be different ideas. So let them bounce those ideas around, look at various parts in the sports and see what things we want to introduce. So again, it could be an issue that we've focused on, they've come up with a solution, let's try that, see if it works or not. It could be a new idea that we want to try, so again, let's try that as quickly as possible, see if it works. If it works, great. Maybe widen it and use it across more meetings. If it doesn't work, either scrap it or tweak it or whatever. But what I do want to do is make sure that everyone across the sport feels involved and knows that they have a voice and they have a kind of conduit for that voice as well. So they'll have these various groups that they can feed into and they'll take their thoughts and ideas on board. So yes, that is June and July. And I'm sure the new season will be here in no time and I will have a proper catch up with you at that point.
So that was great to hear from Paul Miller. And any final thoughts, Darren?
Well, I was just going to say, Ben, I just following on from what Caroline said, really, it's worth pointing out that many of the items that the PPA board or we discuss on the PPA board are not just with the next sort of 12 or 18, 24 months in mind. They're with the next sort of 4, 5, 10 years in mind, really, and where point-to-point is going. So we've not only got the immediate challenge of a change of government on the horizon and what impact that could have with hunting and following on, and the follow through on impact to pointing. You know, but also you've got other key issues going on, like the gambling bill, which is a big thing for rules racing at the moment, because that's going to affect revenues coming back into racing, and ultimately it's those revenues which feed back through into pointing and other parts of, you know, what is racing in Britain. So yeah, there's always lots to think about, and but you know, we've got to be looking further down the line, 4 or 5 years time, because you know, that's when things are in all likelihood going to be tougher again.
Fair enough. That makes complete sense to me. And so thank you both very much for coming on. It's been really interesting to talk to both of you. We're going to have you both on individually as well, and get stuck into some juicy issues next season, no doubt. But yeah, thanks so much for your time tonight, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much,
Ben. Thanks, Caroline.
And then there was one. If you don't feel sorry for me, then you should, because it's nice having an audience when you're doing this. And Sam's normally sat there with his stupid face looking at me. But he is, in fact, in Venice, fitting saddles. So that leads me on to say my thank yous. We'll start with Sam, actually. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit alongside Sam for the last 18 or so episodes. It's quite a long season, and it's been great fun. He's not as stupid as he looks, and he's got a good heart. So I'll leave that with you. Secondly, massive thank you to all our sponsors, Red Mills, Foran. We've done a video that I would encourage you to go and look at with them, looking at some nutritional values of their feeds and stuff. We've spoken about them at good length, but they do have a really, really good nutrition service, and we'll come into any yard and kind of speak to you on a one-to-one basis about your horses and how they may be improved with Red Mills feeds. A massive thank you to the PPRA for their partnership with us this year, helping to support what we do, and it's been really fun supporting on the road as well with the Go Pointing competition for Shares in a Horse. If you haven't done that, please do. And thank you to all the contributors this season. We've had all sorts of people from all areas of pointing, and the show is absolutely nothing with me droning on without some interesting people to talk to. So thank you so much to all of you, and lastly, a big thank you to Thoroughbred, the sponsors of the Nick Luck Daily section that we do. It's really helped take the podcast to a new level this year, and put us on a big platform to give British pointing a big plug on a national level. So yeah, thank you very much to Thoroughbred, and also to Nick, who was very kind in having us on. And lastly, thank you to you, listeners. Really appreciate your support, and we will be back next season. I've had a few people message me to ask. I've got no reason to give up just yet, and as long as we can all encourage Sam to stick with it, we should be okay. So on that bombshell, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next season. You're listening to Pointing Pointers, the Point to Point podcast.